call the meeting to order of the December meeting of the Park Public Library Board. I will take the roll call. Trustee Tracaperte.
Here.
Trustee Ganguly.
Here.
Trustee Rogers.
Here.
Trustee Bloom.
Here.
Trustee Fruit is here. The first item is the approval of the minutes from our November meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I just have a quick thing. I thought, I don't usually look under a microscope around staff reports, but I just noticed our discussion last week wasn't captured, and so I wonder if we want to capture that around the staff retention. So I don't have it in front of me, but there was no mention of it in the notes.
It wasn't in these notes, but was it attached to the packet that we got last?
No, it was in that report, and there was a discussion that came of it. We can amend the minutes to include that there was a discussion of the staff turnover numbers and a request by the board for staff to follow up with assessments and plans to address those.
Like regular communication or regular updates, yeah. I think that would be good. I just don't want to lose sight of that.
Oh,
Was
absolutely.
that under the additions and terminations, or was that under
It
the
was actually
interim?
just a staff report.
I think it was 7A. I think it was under the strategic priorities report. It was part of that document. Thank you for catching that, Christina.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think that it was in the strategic priorities report, but actually I think it was in the interim co-directors report, because they call out.
That's why I was wondering if that's why it wasn't in the minutes, because it was in the report that was attached to last month's minutes.
Yeah, but the minutes still can reflect.
Like that discussion,
Yeah.
because it's an important one.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Thank you for catching that.
Yes. Yes. With that amendment, with that addition, I'll email staff and copy the board on that to have that added to the minutes for that. With that addition, are there any further discussions related to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the amended minutes say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. It is approved. I received no public comment. Thank you everyone for the minutes, by the way. Did not receive any public comment in writing, and no one showed up. So, Margarima.
Hi, I have some updates for everybody. I bet you're all free. Well, actually, it is very essential. It's the.
I was gonna say, don't be sarcastic.
No, it is. So earlier today, I sent the email from Koya that was sent yesterday, that I received yesterday with the most recent numbers for everything. So you have all the detailed ones, but I wanted to call out some of them, or most of them, in this so that it could be recorded for the
Public. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the search was launched on October 8th. So far, Koya has spoken with 23 sources about the role. 42 individuals have expressed interest, 31 have sent in applications. And I wanted to add that we've been told that even as we move ahead with scheduling interviews, Koya will continue to receive and consider very seriously all applications, so that there isn't like a deadline per se until somebody is hired. Koya so far has screened 14 candidates out of the process, so it came down basically to two things. One was either the candidates did not have an NLIS, which this time of course we said was necessary, and that if they had there was a lack of senior level leadership administration, then they were
Screened out.
14 screened out from the 31?
Yes, so that leaves, if you're doing the math, 17 candidates still in the pool. The search committee has reviewed 8 of those applications, and We've had pretty in-depth conversations about them all. So the next steps include, there's a meeting this Friday, so that's 12:20, and we will be reviewing more of the applications. So these are applications that are based on the conversation that both Trish and both Trish and Amber have, and they, further some particular ones, or they might say that these are particularly interesting, but we see everybody's applications. So we'll have a discussion this Friday. There was also a discussion about when the interview should happen. At first, there was some talk about maybe having some interviews, starting the interview process now. But actually, the search committee decided, sort of unanimously decided not to go that direction. A, because we were worried that we would not remember details from the interviews, before the holidays, and be able to compare them appropriately. And, if there was a chance that there would be more candidates coming in, throughout January, and it seemed like a better idea to wait. That said, even though it was a better idea, it does mean that between January 13th and January 23rd, in those 10 days, we will have 6 interviews. So 6 one-hour interviews. Obviously, you can imagine that we're trying to find scheduling for all of those. Staff office hours are going with, COA is going to hold staff office hours on January 7th. There's going to be a community office hour on January 8th. We're hoping that there'll be an anonymous online survey that will be available until then, and then they will take, COA will sort of collect the information from the survey and the community office hour and see how we proceed then. We have a meeting 12:20, so that's this Friday. We also have a meeting in 3 weeks, so that's January 10th. And we will be preparing for the interviews that will be coming up between the 13th and the 23rd. And if there are any new applications, if there are identification of any new candidates, we'll be doing that. We'll meet, the next step after that is that the search committee will meet on January 24th to debrief on those interviews, and talk about what candidates we want for second round interviews. There are 2 things that I would like, of course, ask any questions from any of this material, but, and I'm just realizing that I'm the only one on the search committee here, so I can make up whatever I want to catch me, and I can take credit for everything too. But there are 2 things that I wanted us to like note or discuss, and one of those 2 things is an actual decision. So can I just ask those, and then you can ask me all questions? Okay, so that I wanted to confirm that we are, the search committee, we are empowered to do the first round interviews. So like from my notes from the meetings, the whole board will be deciding who we want to call as finalists. But between that, there is this first, and to be able to do that, that would mean some familiarity with the second round interviews, obviously. But we want, I just wanted to confirm that we will be moving ahead, because as you can tell, there's, those at least 6 interviews between January 10th and the 13th and the 23rd, and then we're meeting the day after that, which is the 24th, to discuss all candidates.
I was going to say, I was going to ask about that to verify, because that was my recollection to that, and I was to say, my question was going to be confirming that it was going to be that the committee was going to be doing those, or I knew there was one point a discussion, but I could not remember if that was, the idea was set aside that it would be different groups of us doing an early round of interviews, but I did not recall that specifically, so I was going to ask for clarification. I am perfectly comfortable with the committee members doing that first screen. You've seen all the documents, you've been in this process. I am comfortable with that committee, plus I think it allows us a flexibility of scheduling that trying to get most, if not all of us together to do that is gonna be near impossible.
I know we talked about having different small groups before, and the thought was there won't be continuity between the
Yeah.
different.
Thank you.
And then
Thank you,
different
that reminds me.
applicants.
Yes, that
yeah.
is jumping out of my brain, thank you.
And we kind of decided whatever the last chunk was, and the number went from 3 to 5 to 2 to whatever that last chunk is, that's where we would at least look at the resumes and discuss.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
first round, I think we should leave it to the committee
I
to
would
review.
concur. I have a question, is anyone taking minutes?
I am,
Our secretary is not here, I can take minutes.
well,
Well,
you
she
know,
doesn't-
usually the staff types up based
Oh.
off of
Okay.
the recordings. So,
I just had this moment where I was like, we just voted on it, and I don't know if we have minutes for the next one.
We'll, of course, the entire board will be deciding which candidates to bring as finalists.
Mhm.
Again, I just wanted to, because I know we've said this before, but as like my calendar fills up, I want to make sure that we're all aware that this will be moving pretty quickly, you know, because we're trying to do, of course, due diligence to the applications, but also consider that,
move in a timely fashion.
yeah.
I
So-
appreciate that.
So just, you know, we're still looking, we're only actually, thanks to COA, we're only actually, I think, maybe a week behind their original whatever, so we're, so I'm pretty impressed.
I'm adding them to my
Yeah,
holiday
that's
card
very
list.
well
Yeah, so I feel like if we were just banking on them being late and coasting on that, that's not working
No, I
out.
mean, like, for hiring any position ever in the world.
Right.
A week behind is on time, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good news.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for all your work on this.
Oh, sure.
I mean, yeah, my only concern would be like, can you all meet 6 times and that, but, I mean,
Well, it's particularly
Sounds-
challenging since, of course, for none of us, this is a daytime job, so of course during the daytime our hours are limited, so we're trying to schedule it in one of 2 days a week or something, but we'll get there. Okay, so I actually need a vote on something substantive. The market feedback, so this is when Trish and Amber talked to like the candidates and what they hear back. You remember last month, the feedback had to do with, well, it had to do with like a variety of things, including, you know, the history of the situation. There has been some question about the posted salary range. So some candidates are finding it to be on the low side. So I don't know if you remember, but when we were discussing the salary, when we were sort of deciding on the job posting, Billy had actually sent us information showing how like there are range, so there are comps for like libraries are sized, depending on like how many employees, the budget, you know.
Community, yeah.
Right, like so given that, that range, that's how we decided on our job posting. So if you can find that information, or I can try and find it real quick and resend it to you, but the concern is that this seems like even more work than a usual ED position, given the fraught nature of this. COA did not say that this was like in any serious way inhibiting candidates.
But they were hearing it.
But they were hearing it. So the question is there any wiggle room, which I take to mean would like negotiating for a higher salary be like acceptable? I think that's how I would take it, though.
I don't think I mean, what the posting did not have like it wasn't like make or break, it wasn't take it or leave it, right?
It was a posted salary range, which I believe, and you all will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Illinois is now legally like is required to post a salary range.
Yeah.
I think that some
Starting in the next, in the new year, yeah.
Yeah.
Of organizations of certain sizes, yeah.
So, and I think that, you know, obviously we're reaching candidates from a variety of different places and maybe that's not typical. So there has been an expression of gratitude in having that posted salary range, which apparently is not always the case. But the question has been about if there's any wiggle room. And I punted that to this group because I think that it's.
We can't have a vote on it tonight,
Sure.
but I think, in my mind, there was always gonna be a negotiation on the salary. You know, and I just, and that's coming from me, I always took that as a default.
Okay.
As an assumption in this process, that there was gonna be, we would make an offer, they would come back with something else and stuff like that, so I'm not the only voice here, but that's where my thinking was, that it wasn't gonna be, that there was gonna be some back and forth with whatever candidate, so, but
I will say, so thank you. I mean, I guess the idea is negotiating beyond even the upper limit, right, of the salary range.
And,
That's what
like,
we're talking about.
Are the people that have said this out loud, have they still applied? Is that where, like, or did they not even apply?
I think that at that moment, so it's now been like a week and a half maybe since we've had the search committee meeting. If I remember correctly, at that point, they were not going to apply based on this. But, you know, Koya would like to know what they can tell the candidates as they talk to them.
I think it's commensurate, as always, with experience, right? Like, I've definitely applied for jobs and there has been a range, and I've pushed because I had more experience than was offered. And sometimes there's been like, no, we can't do that. Other times there has been the understanding that, okay, you're coming in with these additional like connections and book of business.
You're adding things that we didn't have on the list.
Right.
So we
And I think that's part of the negotiation of being a job seeker in this market, which is, you know, this is very much it doesn't always feel like it, but to a certain extent, there is a bit of a job seeker's market. There is a bit of like, push back, ask. I mean, I think that's sort of where people are right now. You know, I wouldn't say like ask for 300K. We are a public library, and I think that would bring a lot of distaste to.
Yeah, and we wouldn't approve it. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
that's like when we decide on a candidate, that includes a salary.
I think this is more a question of like, do we want it to affect the pool? And I don't. So
Yeah.
like, I think to Matt's point, like I pulled up Billy's email.
Yeah.
And he points out that like even the stated range is the external stated range. Like we have an internal range that is bigger on both sides, but like it does look, given his numbers, that we are a little bit low compared to some comparable libraries, but
Yeah, that's
I was gonna say it depends on which type of comparable.
he averaged across different markets, so he did budget, population, employee size, and all of them are actually at the higher end of our range. So.
So I think that,
But we really focus on that mid-range, right?
Yeah, and I think typically, historically, we were on the, you know, and I'm trying to think back to all the years of like David and everything, we tended to be, trying to think back, in the middle, maybe a little bit on the lower, you know, lower than midway on our ED compensation compared to what we would consider peer libraries in the region.
But we also had a different structure.
We did, and so yeah, I mean, I think I'm not opposed to going, you know, above the posted range. You know, we didn't say this is a hard range. We didn't say that this is, take it or leave it. I don't think I really gave it a conscious thought that there would be like, this is a number that we like, but it's gonna move. I think maybe it was just always an assumption in my mind that there was gonna be some back and forth with a candidate, but again, it's like, I don't really think I put any deliberative thought
Okay.
behind that until tonight, but I'm comfortable with it if there's gonna be some.
So, I mean, I know that we can't vote on this, right?
Right.
We can vote on it next month. And I'm wondering if there's something, if there's another piece of information that we should have, do you know what I mean? To
Yeah.
make that vote, like, do we need to talk to Billy again,
Well,
or?
I mean, in Billy's email, he actually suggested that range too, so I don't know, I don't know if I wanna change it externally, unless it really is inhibiting the pool. Like,
Well, my notes from that meeting say that Koya is going to continue to talk to potential candidates, that it's not, they don't see this as discouraging, like a huge amount of candidates. But that for some, it might actually be a pay cut. And for others, they're definitely already at the top of that range, you know?
yeah.
I think, I'm trying to think of the way to address this without having to wait a month. And say, we have had a discussion and it's public, between the five of us. And what I have not heard amongst the five of us, anything that would lead me to think that there would be adamant opposition to adjustments to that range.
Yeah.
To meet, the market needs, the experience of a qualified candidate. I think personally, if I don't know that I don't think I can honestly ask someone to take a pay cut to come here. Unless there's, for whatever, but within reason,
But we don't usually even ask for what people are making currently, right? Like that is not information.
We haven't.
Cannot under Illinois.
Right, so that we, but yes, so
And people will tell us.
yes, sure.
But there's
So,
public records
yeah.
of what people are making.
no,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I will say that Koya had said that and I can confirm this to them on Friday, I had said that we would need to vote as a board, we would need to have a conversation. And they said that even that is something that they can tell the candidates, right? Like that we're having a conversation, that there is not a vote, that you can go look at the recording of this conversation to see how amenable you think somebody might be to,
Yeah,
and I think that should be.
I think so.
So that's okay to report back to them on
I
Friday?
think that's a fair representation of our conversation.
Okay. Yeah, so that was the thing. I don't know if you have any questions from the next steps or the
No, I think that's.
numbers.
I'm heartened. I've seen some of the, I've been copied on some of that, and, the local, local, regional plus national interest has definitely been heartening.
Yeah, it's actually pretty exciting. We're getting, I feel, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look at the 8 applications that's in that folder that I think everybody has access to.
The Ignite
The Ignite.
login, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
I'll send you the login.
You do that, Matt? So
I'll send that to her.
Okay.
I'll send it to you right
Maybe
now.
we just send it to all of the
Yep.
board members?
Yep.
Okay, so I don't know, but I'm excited. I will also say that one of the market feedback things that we heard is that, so I was saying that the ask for more money outside of the people are already at the top range, or it would be a pay cut or whatever. Part of that comes from, like, this is a fraud kind of situation, and they would be expected to do some heavier lifting than normal. I can't actually remember who it was in the search committee meeting, but somebody, Suzanne, somebody pointed out that the like building relationships with community members, staff, and board would be part of the lifting for any new executive director. They would be doing some of that anyway. And then I will say that Koya also mentioned that some people that they've talked to have also been like, oh my God, you think that's a horror story, you should listen to what happened at my library, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of, apparently there's a dark underbelly of public library administration that I did not know.
I think it's not even the underbelly, I think just
The overbelly.
the overbelly. I mean, we had how many bomb threats, you know, in 2024?
Yeah.
And a shooting, and another attempted shooting that did not end in a death. So I think that unfortunately, safety and the safety of staff is going to be a huge part, and that is part of the evolving landscape of public information, right? Because there's a lot of people who don't want access. I don't want the public to have access to information.
It's really quite depressing.
I'm so sorry. Happy holiday season's greetings, everyone.
Okay, so I have some notes to take back. If there's anything else that you think of, obviously email me. We're meeting this Friday. Thank you. Oh, and then I should figure out what to do about the quorum situation.
Yeah.
Hey Nat, what do I do about the quorum situation?
I was gonna say, one of us showing up doesn't help.
No, unless we deputize you real quick to be
And then
a substitute, a proxy. Actually, can Suzanne or Ted?
No, we can't, you're not, Illinois doesn't allow for proxies on elected boards. I've looked.
What if it's another, what if it's
They have
another,
previously.
what if it's a proxy who's also an elected member? Like, and it would be in this case.
Obviously, you just have to have the meeting at Suzanne's house done.
Oh, yeah, she's not here, right? Like, so let's, we all.
Yeah, and they get a.
Okay, well, if,
Turns
again,
over to the public.
if any of you think of a creative solution outside of me pleading with Ted, please let me know.
I'll try and figure out something, if I can think of something.
Okay, thank you.
Do that. Thank you, Rima. This
Yeah.
was incredibly helpful. Lots of good news there. So the survey was mentioned, the staff survey with Holistic. So Virginia, since our last whole board meeting, Virginia and I had a meeting with Holistic. And we got a revised draft of a survey which I thought was much improved from their first version, and then shared it with Susie, Lee, and Billy to get their input. They had some concerns about some of it and some questions.
Yeah.
Virginia and I met with them today via Google chat, and I think had a very productive meeting of kind of airing out some of those concerns and finding some solutions.
Their concerns were not like out of left field. It was that there are lines that I think all of us understand in our heads when we intuitively read the questions, but that are not intuitive. So there are a couple places in there where it vaguely mentions leadership, and we're kind of like, everybody's leadership. We need to make sure that there is a line between this is the board asking for the survey, and then in the individual questions where we're saying we're asking you about leadership, i.e. the library leadership. So there was some
Nuance.
yeah, some terminology that needs to be cleaned up that I think they picked up on where honestly, my brain, I knew what it meant and I read it that way. So we were happy with that. And then we talked over a little bit about couching expectations. I think Lee's gonna come back to us with a timeline on Friday so that we can include that with the survey to sort of tell the staff this is why we're sending out the survey is coming from the board, this is what it's meant to do. It's going to, make things better for the ED this way, it's going to make things better for the staff this way, it's going to make things better for the community this way. Please, for the love of God, fill it out. And then sort of give a timeline of, we're leaving it open for this long, we expect this long for them to look at the results, we expect by this date to have something that we can share with leadership and the ED. That way, the staff feels like, they don't feel like it's being held up because we only meet monthly. They understand that this is how long it's taking for us to actually look at the data and actually pull points together and for Holistic to do what they need to do to get the information. So,
Yeah.
I think that's the last bit.
So can I ask, I actually would be, so we say leadership, because there's also like managers, right? Like,
And
so,
I think that's,
This is part of the,
that language,
Okay.
that language nuance, that language, detail of making sure that there is, because there's the leadership team,
Mhm.
and then there is the leadership. So we just want to make sure that, and that was part of our conversation today, was that making sure that we're clear in the emails that go out to the staff that this is the board following through on the commitment we made about a survey, that this is commissioned by the board, because they also, the semi-annual survey to staff, and NPS just hit at the beginning of the month, at the beginning of December. So they just did a staff survey that they normally do twice a year. So part of this communication is also making it clear that, yes, you may have just done that, but without saying that you just did that, but now this is from the board. And this is the board's goal of getting the, where are we gonna take the results of this? And also, and I think that Virginia raised a good point of what's gonna happen to the results afterwards of, it's going to be provided to the new ED and the leadership team, the management team, to help, drive the new leadership administration forward.
and we did talk about, we won't know what we're going to do until we see the information. And also some of what needs to be done will not be in the purview of the board. So those will be pieces where some of the outcome of this board survey will then be transferred to the ED leadership and the library staff, because those will be operational things that are not
For us.
in our purview.
So I have, the question that I've had about the staff survey, which I'm really excited that we're moving ahead on, has been how to differentiate like a staff survey that's responding to our current moment from a more regular input, especially when it comes to the ED evaluation. An annual ED evaluation asks typically about, or like the board is asked to evaluate an executive director based on how they're managing staff and staff culture. And I feel like we don't always hear that. We don't get a full picture of that, because obviously we're getting our information directly from the ED. And so, does that make sense? So I feel like so this staff survey, to be clear, is the one that's addressing the particular situation that we're in right now.
This is a one-off employee engagement survey. I hate to use the word holistic, but it is a holistic survey to the staff about working here, us, leadership, how they think things should go, are going, stop, start, continue. I don't think in this form, it's something that we want to replicate each year. I think this is a one time, and then we figure out from here, how do we truncate this? Because one thing Billy did bring up was we do generally get 75 or 80% participation from the staff. But that's on 2 to 4 question surveys, and we're basically asking them for like War and Peace. So there might be a lower response rate, and that's why we're trying to leave it open for 4 weeks instead of like 2 or whatever. But I don't think this is something that we can regularly ask staff to like stop.
And we
do
may
every
not
year.
even wanna use holistic for the repeat, thing like that. I think that would be, we would wanna look at that fresh and get, put out for proposals on something like that of saying a regular thing or get new proposals to come into us, because I think the conversations we had previously with, when we started this whole thing, were a much different mindset than what we ended up looking for in a survey firm. I think ended up being different than looking at it for terms of an executive director feedback piece. So I think
Okay.
my take is, I think I would wanna get new proposals from
Sure.
firms to look at how it would be around an executive director review.
So, I mean, it makes complete sense. Can I ask that we, I don't know about requests for proposals, and I don't know
Right.
how much money we want to, extend towards this. But I'm wondering if the board can at least have a discussion, just maybe based on our evaluation forms, about what some of these questions might be, obviously in closed session, before we have a new ED in place. Because I think, like, letting a new ED know that this is how you will be evaluated, and these are the pieces that we will use, is entirely appropriate, and I think not necessarily something we did last time, right? So
I think that's fair. I think that would be fair to the new ED.
I mean,
I
I'm
think that would be-
not
wonder-
really trying to add more work to our
No, I wonder,
docket.
would Koya maybe help us with that? Like, it might extend their contract just a little bit, like, they are gonna help onboard, right? Isn't that part of their
Yeah.
contract?
Yeah.
And so that kind of feeds into it,
Like, how do we know the onboarding was successful a year from now?
yeah, like
Based
just
over
setting
what-
us up, like last time we did the job description and then kind of worked backwards from that, but if we could do that again, but like they're experts in this, like maybe they would lend a hand. I don't know, if that might take away from, that might add to their
I can ask.
questions, but it could
Yeah.
be nice,
Thank you.
so that we don't have
That's
to,
a good suggestion.
less for us.
But I definitely think, that's an excellent point of establishing that up front to say,
Yeah.
this is not just the job description we hired you into, but here is the rubric and some of the stuff that we're gonna look to see how we judge you 6 months, a year from now, whether or not we feel like you are, succeeding at that.
So again, I'm obviously not gonna be here, next year, but I did think that one of the things that I liked about the evaluation materials that we put together for the last ED was that it was based on the job description that they were hired under. I think that was Christina's suggestion that we do that, and I thought that was like was just incredibly logical. So I was wondering if we can commit to that, like part of what we tell a new ED might be that, your evaluation will be.
At least your initial evaluation will be based off of.
Yeah.
In large part, I think we could add other things, but I think if we do add other things on top of what the job description is, because there will be other things that maybe pop up, and I think if we can give, advanced notice that, on top of your filling, based off some of these, the position profile, job description, there may also be, this 1, 2, or 3.
Is it appropriate to do like, set that up, do that rubric, we have a nice template, and to do, I'll say in my position, like, I got like a very relaxed, kind of like 3 months in, like, hey, these are things that has been noticed, these are what senior leadership's noticing, maybe we could work on this, like, do you know what I mean, like, and it was like a really nice guidance, and a mid-year, and I don't know what the feasibility is of like giving some sort of like mid-year guidance feedback to any new director.
I think that would be critical.
Okay,
I think,
Okay, 'cause I feel like
that's a really, I think that's something that would, I think the board and the director would benefit. I think
I
both,
agree.
I think
Okay.
both sides would
Yeah,
benefit.
I also think it sounds really, really important. I will say then, to come back to the initial point, then I would ask, how are we checking in with staff? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if they're already doing multiple whatever, and they're doing the satisfaction survey, and there's, like, I think that any evaluation of the ED, given that the job description includes staff culture, for instance, right? And any evaluation should be able to speak to that. And we cannot speak to that, I don't think, ethically, without actually checking in with staff. I think that,
I think at mid-year, given that we're looking to hire like March, sorry, I'm staring at the invisible calendar in my head. If we're looking to hire in March, the next ENPS goes out in June, and that would be 3 months in, that would be a good touch point. I wonder if maybe we ask Billy, hey, for this first year, can we get an ENPS every quarter? And then do something ED specific closer to the actual evaluation, which would be like, I'm thinking we would tee it up in January, February, because the 1 year would be in March.
okay. I mean, we're maybe getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Maybe we don't need to figure all of this out right now. I would love to think about that some more, because again, my understanding was that the ENPS speaks differently, or I feel like this is a discussion we had, because remember when we were talking about checking in with staff, we were told that of course they have this ENPS survey, like you can get those results, and we were like, well, what we're asking for is substantively different, right?
I
So
agree,
then,
once we get closer to the evaluation, I don't think we're gonna have too much that's that substantive at like 3 months or 6 months. I don't want to fatigue the staff by asking them for so many narrative surveys in the first year.
makes sense, I'm gonna take notes, thank you.
Yeah, and I think, that's, and one of the, I think, and one of the things that came up when we did some of the trick is, at 6 months, the new ED is still, hopefully still learning, learning the organization, and is still like introducing themselves to the people. I mean, at this point, those relationships will have been formed a little bit, but I think it still will be, 6 months is still relatively early for that, but I think it's a good touch point for us to like check in to see what, what are their takeaways, where we're at for strengths, weaknesses, and stuff like that, and relationships and organizationally, but I think that's absolutely a good checkpoint, but I think it's still, I would be, so. That's right, so. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you keeping us focused on that point. So, already, then the next item we had was board goals.
I think I only got one person to respond, and I did mean to send a reminder and I forgot. I know for myself, I think I'm having a hard time even develop my own, so I didn't do this the same way even though I sent it out. I think I'm having a hard time understanding what we mean, because to me there's so much that we are doing right now. Like I can think of like 5 goals on our agenda today, so I think I'm personally struggling to understand what we mean.
Well, and I came back as like in the next part, the board development, one of the things that, as I was pulling various documents together, I saw in a number of other libraries was a board self-evaluation. And I didn't go digging for what their metric was, what their document was, or how they did it. But a lot of these other boards have reference to a board self-evaluation, which in my mind goes, okay, so you've set to this point goals or, things of what you're going to do. How do you, because otherwise how do you evaluate yourself? Well, I attended all the meetings. Okay, done. In that way, what else is there? And I think that comes back to that board goals of, you know, personal goals as a trustee. Is my thing to attend one program a month? Is it to, you know, or is the board, is it to attend one ILA, Rails, whatever meeting a year? You know, those could be those things. You know, it could be as simple as that. It could, you know, or something else. But in terms of, that's where I come back is, it's how are we evaluating ourselves to it? You know, we could set various goals, but if it's,
Like the accountability to those goals.
yeah, if there's not a method to hold ourselves accountable.
That all sounds right. I think for me, that's what I was trying to do with that trustee handbook thing, but it would require a lot of like collaboration.
Yeah.
Cause like what you're saying is more like a commitment to me, and I did try to like write some of those, but like that we should mutually agree upon, right? Like I don't wanna say what I think others should do, but I do think there are certain things like that are pretty standard for being on a board that I put in here. But personally, like I thought the intent here was like what we personally were hoping to do.
Okay.
I actually think that it's a combination of all of it. Like, I think that, of course, what we do personally should be, and that is maybe the thing that we've overlooked the most or something. I think that's an important thing to name. But I also think a board's self-evaluation should be about how we're working, how the board is working. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I think that there's that. I think that there are, like, just like when we put together the ED evaluation, there was, you know, there were questions about specific metrics which are important, and then there are those like more interpersonal, communication-oriented. So I think that if we're talking about being a functioning board or a productive, successful, compassionate, collaborative board, which is what we're asking for in our candidates, then it has to be a combination of multiple things. So I think that we can just as easily stress too much on the individual accomplishments, let's say, or individual commitments, as we can stress not enough. Like, so I think that we'd have to do, I don't know, I think we'd have to figure out like what the metrics are. So at some point, I think we should just start maybe just naming what the metrics are. So like, I don't know, do you know what I mean? Like, so you're saying that there are some things that a board member is expected to do. And I think that actually in a previous meeting, Susie had pointed out that there's, you know, like on our library website, there is like a document that's about the expectations of library board members, and that should be part of onboarding, and so that can be like a regular check-in that we do or whoever does at the beginning of, you know, like every 3 months or something at the board meeting. And I think that would require a different kind of accountability piece than being able to say, what are our strategic plans, or what are we learning, or what are our strategic goals, not even annually, but even just like, you know, for the foreseeable future and in chunks of time. So I think it's going to have to be all of them.
To me, like I see it feeding into like the discussions around board development, like board role, responsibilities, policies, like a lot of this board development, number 7. But I'm like such an organized freak, like I think a lot of problems will be solved through organization, and maybe they won't, but I think to me, like that's where I would want to start. But so I don't know, this is my ask, I guess, of just like, I did try to throw together this document. I do think it would be helpful for new members or new board members. I just threw this together, but this was like my thought of like onboarding trustee roles and responsibilities, and I kept it very like attend board meetings if I'm able to attend and form board president.
Yeah, that's in some of the documents I pulled together for 7.
Yeah.
Was doing this because it's
Let's do it. I'm dying to. I mean, I really think like if one of us can't attend a meeting, we should watch the recording, we should start there, check in with a colleague, somebody. Like, I think we've been doing it organically, but if it's written down, it tends to matter more to us.
It's not just that, then you don't have to think about it. Then you
True.
don't have to think about,
You're
oh,
like,
I
what's
missed a
my
meeting, what
list
do I
of
need to
things
do?
I'm supposed to do?
It'll just be
Well,
there.
and honestly, like, this is a pretty functional board. We get along, we don't have like, we're not screaming at each other, we're not threatening each other.
Out
Like,
loud. I'm sorry.
well, I mean, other than you. But we're reasonably, but you know, there's an election coming and we have no idea who's going to be voted on. And it could be, like, we could get somebody who doesn't like public libraries and their goal is to defund a public library, right? And so actually making sure that you're creating a structure so that the library is protected. And if there are good people with the right intentions, things move. And if there are a mix, things can still function. And you don't have a bunch of people who are like, I'm not gonna show up, so there's no quorum, and then there's no budget, and then there's no, you know, fill in the blank. You have people who understand the obligations, and you don't have people doing the wrong thing.
And that's the
But
struggle. No, please go ahead.
No,
No, you started first.
I was just gonna say, but anybody who's trying to defund the library is not going to then come to meetings because it said so on a sheet of paper. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that, like, we should have the expectations, we move ahead with like, a good faith belief that somebody will abide by it. I think clarity is important, I think expectations are important. I don't agree with Christina that like some of the things that are affecting or have affected this library, for instance, in the last year could be solved by better organization. Like I don't know that that's, you know, like I think organization is an important tool.
It could have maybe made some things less
And
explosive,
even
honestly,
just-
like, but I can't go back, we can't go back, we can't open this can of worms.
I understand what you're saying. I really do get it, and I just don't think that that's how systemic issues work.
No.
And systems can use organization and like, you know, bureaucracy
Oh, I'm
and
not
everything
suggesting
just
that
as
at
well
all.
for its purpose. So I think that that's why I'm saying a combination. Like I think that a combination of these things where we're checking in about practices, we're checking in about commitments, but those commitments are also like, they are both, you know, whatever, I don't want to necessarily say intellectual or ideological, but those as well as like literally we will do these things. I think it has to be all of those.
So can we make our first board goal to respond to Christina's request for board goals?
Well, sure, but really it's not Rima's, like this was your ask originally.
Well,
You
if
had
I'm
your
gonna be
hands
fair,
full.
it was actually
You
Maya's ask.
Oh, okay.
But Maya had suggested, the book suggested that we should like be thinking about board goals, yeah.
I thought you were gonna say, look at this handbook thing, because I guess my goal would be to work on the organization, it's what I think decent at, and I care about it. But I agree, it's not gonna solve all problems, I just think it will solve some, and right now, we need to solve the problems we can, so let's do
I
that.
think so. I think what we've seen in, you know, we saw what happened in Niles, Maine, and other libraries, or, you know, Downers Grove is going through a whole thing right now. And it's not just libraries, but other governing body, you know, municipal governments in the region and around. These kinds of documents, the goals, the handbooks, the manuals, you know, provide the guardrails for, you know, that, and it may just be one person, it may just be like one person in malcontent who decides that they just don't like what we've been doing for years and just wants to make sure that their dissenting voice is heard at the table, but we need to make sure that we have these things in place so that singular person intent on causing, to slow down all of our processes and everything doesn't grind us to a complete halt, that we can still move forward on our goals and our priorities. It won't fix everything or anything like that, but I think that we have seen too often over the last 8 years that so many things that we assumed were rules and laws were really just kind of a collective understanding of how we thought things should operate for the good, and all it takes is 1 or 2 people who have decided to thumb their nose at it and go, no, and
I
make
would
things
say
difficult.
There's also like opportunity there, because I think there's also, like, on the flip side, plenty of things that just we do, and we don't examine and critically look at it, and then like, we're like, oh, we are empowered to do that thing, let's do it then. And so I do think it's like, that's why I'm always like, what are our policies versus our norms? Because I think that's a very fuzzy thing actually for a lot of institutions.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm so excited by this, but I do feel stuck because I think we have so much work to do, and that's why I like go back to the document, because then I can make sense of it. But it's like, we have hiring to do, a survey to do, we have our regular work we have to do, like the budget and strategic priorities, and like, I just recognize our capacity isn't great right now. So I guess I want our goals to be related to what is already in front of us instead of like brand new stuff.
Sure.
If that makes sense. But then again, everyone has their own workload and manages it. So if there's things you want to do, that's just for me. Like, that's how I'm making sense of this.
I don't know. I just know that if we keep until another 4 or 5 months before we figure out what the relationship is between the board's strategic goals and the day-to-day practices of the library, that it is going to be DEI issues first that drop out of do you know what I mean? That we lose our scrutiny on. So that is historically just true of every institution, right? Like, so I understand bandwidth, truly I understand the limited capacity of bandwidth. I can talk once more about the 6 meetings in 10 days, 6 interviews in 10 days that we have to do, but I want to be careful about saying or acknowledge, when we acknowledge what the limit or what our limits are, that we recognize that there are some things that get dropped more quickly and first than
You don't want to
others.
like self-censor almost, or yeah. I hear
For
that.
instance, like I was taken today at our conversation when you, Christina, brought up about the fact that there was, the missing, in our minutes, the missing
Conversation.
about retention, that we didn't actually talk about the fact that it was the retention is a racial issue. Do you know, like, we didn't use that word, we didn't talk about it in that way, we talked about it as a missing piece of data, which it is, but the reason that it garnered so much conversation has everything to do with the fact that it speaks to, like, institutional equity. And these are, the 5 of us are committed and we are not backing away from those questions, but when it comes to language, we're still like hedging our bets, and I think that, so to me, that's the thing that worries me. The ED is, of course, I think, the ED search is like deeply important to me, and I think it's incredibly necessary. I don't think that we can just, or that we should just sort of wait on some of these things. So if we can talk about board development on these things, or we can move to 7, I guess.
Yeah. So, thank you, Margarita. So I'll just jump to one thing. The first one, the Open Meetings Act and modern intricacies related to OMA. There was a number of documents I came across. The Illinois County Governing Association. I can't remember the other couple, but they were all like 40-page, 50-page documents that were rather dry. I reached out to Ansel Glink. They have an attorney who specializes in presentations about this. She does, she can do like a webinar with us or come in person to a meeting. There will be a cost to that as attorney time, obviously. I think for any kind of substantive discussion that we would want to have around what are the nuances of this, it is probably going to, I think it would be some kind of professional, and when it comes to open meetings law, to me that means attorney. So I think it doesn't have to be Ansel Blink, there might be other people. I have reached out to Monica Harris at Rails, who's the executive director and former Oak Park library staffer, who they have some recordings that are available to members like us, that they have on their website that she's going to get me the information on for us to be able to access and look at that. I think that perhaps as part of the board onboarding, the new member onboarding come May, that unless I'm open to like doing it sooner, but perhaps the best time to organize that is to line something up for when the new board meets in May, to kind of get that piece along with some of these other things really in that place especially, and also the equity and anti-racism training, to do something that is like on a weekend or something that we can commit to for something like that, where we can, not shuffle off an evening of board business on that, but I'm open to other ideas of how to do that. But I think I will share the documents that I came across with that, and I'll make sure we get to the, when Monica gets me the link for the online recording that they have,
Yeah.
to send that around.
What's our appetite for budget on this? Since we just had a
Yeah.
conversation on increasing potentially
That's
our
it.
overhead budget with salary.
Britt at Ansel Blink said, let me pull that up. This is Julie Tappendorf is the attorney, she's a partner at Ansel Blink. The OMA training webinar is $375.
$375.
Yeah. For a webinar, and she can come to do in-person training as well. He did not include a price with that, but I would imagine it is at least that.
Can I ask, so I'm trying to parse a couple of things. So is this the general OMA stuff, or is this the modern intricacies stuff? Because this is a question that's coming up in the search committee, because obviously the COA, we're trying to make decisions and gather feedback, for instance, on Google Docs, and that's something, and trying to negotiate or trying to navigate what is in OMA and what's not, and what runs afoul of OMA, so these are things that I think we need to know,
Well, and I think that's where having, frankly, what's in at least my estimation, would end up being an attorney. You do it either a webinar, something live, not just a recording. A recording is only going to cover so much. But if we have specific questions that need, that we may have, would come from some sort of in-person, which would of course, before we agree to it, we want to say, we would want to be able to have, have some back and forth discussion about this. I don't want it, for $375, I would want it to be a webinar of us. I don't want it to be us and 50 other boards, just getting a presentation. I want to be able to ask questions for whatever it is. But I think that's, they're going to go off, they're going to give, my expectation, I should say, is I don't want to tell what somebody else is going to do. My expectation is anybody we bring in is I would want to be able to ask questions about how OMA operates in the current environment.
Wouldn't it be best for us to ask our own attorneys that?
I think Well, our own attorneys are.
Meaning, should we go with Ansel Glade if we're going to be asking Oak Park Public Library specific questions?
I could see yes and no, they may not necessarily be the best in OMA. I mean, they do a lot of public body work, I mean, they do a lot of government, municipal government stuff, so they deal with it a lot, but they're not the only ones. And the law will apply to that, I mean, differing attorneys will have different perspectives, I'm sure even within that firm, two attorneys who approach OMA may not see it the same way. And how they see it is not gonna necessarily be how the Attorney General sees it if we ever run afoul of it.
And you think, you said there are also some more generic free webinars that already exist somewhere.
Rails has one, kind of a one that they did, I'd have to take a look and see when she said that was from, but it was since COVID, so it does incorporate, it wasn't from this year, but it was not like 2018.
Okay, it talks
before.
about remote and asynchronous work and all that. Okay. My vote would be, if we're gonna pay for something, wait until we have the new board seated, make sure that whatever we're paying for is at least going to be,
Available to what the.
it's going to last at least the next 2 years of people sitting at this table.
Excellent point.
But I also think that if there is something more generic that all of us can look at now, I don't want us to wait 6 months. We have some questions along the way.
Yeah.
If there's something generic that we can all do on our own time and, send a, hey, I watched it. I think that's good.
I mean, and I can have I understand, thank you. I understand that it's a remote thing, obviously, so I can try and schedule a remote watching party or viewing party or whatever, in that, in case, for me, having like a specific day and time that I'm going to do this is both stressful for my calendar, but also it actually works.
That's why I'm saying, like, if this is something we want to try to do eminently, if it's a link that I can go watch at 3 o'clock in the morning because my brain won't shut off, it might get done. If it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, absolutely no promises. Because-
Right.
So if we can start that way, and then we have time to plan something, maybe when we would usually have the strategic session in summer, we have the new board panel say, hey, one of the first things we're all gonna get to do, we're gonna get this presentation on
So we understand.
OMA.
So the document I just handed out is from the Digital Media Law Project. It is an organization that compiles laws from around the country on a variety of topics, digital media, commercial use, but also public open meetings. So this is one of the more reasonably drafted summaries of OMA, and it includes some stuff. So it's, but it's just a helpful shorter reference. But I'll make sure to get, I have a draft email with all of the other, with some of the other resources. I was just waiting for the thing from Monica. Yeah, it's the Elk Grove Public Library had a document on their website that was like 40 pages. The Illinois Association of County Boards, I think, was 50. The Attorney General has a webinar slide deck on their website. So I have those three, and then I'll send the webinar information, because I think it'll have to be a login, so I'll make sure to get the information for what our library login to Rails, so we can access that.
Okay.
Because that's not,
It's not publicly.
yeah, it's for membership, and we are a member of Rails, so we will have access to it as board members. Yes.
So, the thing, I don't know if we wanna get into the weeds, but the quorum question that I had for you, it says that it's not a quorum that must be present to have a meeting, but a majority of a quorum. Quorum means the number of members of body committee. A quorum is 5, and the majority of those 5 is 3. So a member body can have a meeting when 3 or more members are present, but then it says, there's one exception to this rule: for a 5-member body, the full quorum of 3 or more members is required for a meeting. I don't know what to do about a 4-member body. It's over here.
There was a question on the FOIA OMA training that had to do with this in 2022, 23, and I got it wrong. I guess I need to retake that training for 2024. Oops. But there's actually a question on that portal that specifically deals with it. Oh, and it's great, everyone will know.
The one like we all take, or?
Yeah, the one that we're all supposed to take, because there is a question that I took.
I remember there being a
And it
table.
was super weird, because it was totally counterintuitive, and I'm like, you've gotta be kidding me, that's the right answer? Like, I remember
Because
like.
laws make sense.
They
No, but there
do
was-
normally
I remember
actually
there-
not.
No, I know, but I remember there being a table
Yeah,
that defined the quorum.
yeah, and it's.
And I don't remember what the numbers are.
You know what, maybe I'll just be up until like for doing my FOIA OMA training through the portal at Kwame's.
Okay.
I took the FOIA training, I was confused, because I feel like, well, I mean,
Yeah.
I have questions about our lawyers and why we got counseled for, like, the community members, because that was so clearly not acceptable under FOIA in the
It
training.
depends on how the question was phrased.
The FOIA training did not make it seem questionable. It made it seem pretty clear that community members should not be FOIA'd. So I am very
What do you
curious
mean?
about that.
What do you mean, like
When we had the FOIAs that involved community, like correspondence with community members, that really felt, I wish I'd taken the training right before that FOIA, because I think we mishandled it. This is why we should-
I'm sorry, like the requests from community members or the requests regarding communications with community members?
Yes, the second, I think.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the second. Oh, yeah, they can't, yeah, someone can't FOIA a personal person,
But
but
why did it happen with two community
Because they
members?
can FOIA elected
Our-
officials. in
our
one
communications with that
position.
person,
But you
because our
can
communications
block
are.
You can, though.
the name.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can.
But then what's stopping you from doing it to like your partner, your spouse, your, like, what if?
Because if your partner or spouse is having those communications with an elected official, that's FOIAble. Like,
True,
that's how
I
you
guess
catch,
I mean,
like, the bad actors who are having,
yeah,
like, the
sexual
affairs,
assaults
yeah, and
messages
whatnot. That's how they caught us through FOIA, because they're like, why are you,
When I took
why are
the
you,
training,
why are
it
you
felt
sending these pictures to your secretary?
pretty clear that, like, I read it and I was just like, I don't understand how that was acceptable, but, okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask more questions next time if it comes in like that.
So, all right, so, let me make that note, so.
I will be right back, I want more water.
Okay, so, and rails info. Okay. Then, I'll skip ahead to D, I'll wait till Maya gets back.
So, while Maya gets back, I don't wanna get us into the thing, but, so right now is our hope in section 7 of the agenda to be actually going, like, developing our own, like, are we talking about board development issues, or are we actually, like,
I think it's,
doing the training? Or,
I think it was-
training up, not officially, obviously.
what I was hoping was with, as we get into some of these other documents is, I think Christina mentioned, like, the idea of a handbook. You'll see there is this handbook from the LaGrange Public Library that I asked the staff to print out, and there's also the manual for general practices for the Oak Park Park District, that this would be us to begin to look at some of these other documents. Like I found some stuff from the Bartlett Public Library, District 97's board stuff, to begin to look at, I think, some of these pieces, maybe perhaps not the OMA because that's state law and how we operate, but some of these other things I think would be beneficial to begin to pull together in a coherent document, whether it's a handbook or we call it a manual or, you know, an onboarding guide, you know, to bring these pieces together in a document, because some of this stuff touches on things that are in our policies in various ways, but they're not, you know, combined in, you know, in a reference in a central reference document for us to go by. And the bylaws are very limited. Our board bylaws are very limited and are generally prescriptive based off state law, based off requirements in state law. A lot of it is there because that we have to have it there. But like these other pieces of, you know, these handbooks, these manuals, you know, the self-evaluation, communication stuff, I think would be kind of fitting into that board role responsibility policies, touching a little bit on board staff relationship of trying to maybe find the pieces from these other guides that, or get inspiration, things we think would benefit us from having in our document, in our piece, as well as perhaps they will spark an idea for us to include something that's not in one of these, so that we can begin to, you know, and I don't know that we're, you know, get through all of it tonight and come up with a final, no way we're having a final document tonight, but begin to have these conversations of what are, I think, and it also feeds back into that board goals of what are the expectations for a board member?
So you're saying that we're trying to build a handbook for ourselves?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're hoping to do that tonight?
No.
To start. Hence the highlighter.
I'm just saying no.
Hence
Well,
the highlighter.
I was actually thinking, you know what this sounds like is really good work for a subcommittee. You know, that will like meet and like talk these things through and they come to the board and have suggestions
Absolutely.
or have recommendations, for instance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm welcome. I welcome that opportunity. I would be happy to participate as a member of that committee and not just as an ex officio sort of thing. I would be happy to help that or even lead that. But I wanted to get us documents in front of us to start looking at, because I personally, I don't know about the rest of you, I work better personally looking at something else and getting ideas from that instead of a blank space. When my wife and I were house shopping, I did infinitely better thinking about how our life, you know, how our stuff would fit in a place that already had furniture in it than empty rooms.
Yeah.
So that's part of where I'm coming at from this, but I know I'm not, so anyway, by all means, I was grabbing stuff that looked a little bit different. A lot of board bylaws and other stuff is very cut and paste. They're almost always the same. Few, you know, differences based off of how many times they meet and all of those things. I love the ones that only meet 3 times a year, but but these are, you know, different I try to stick to Illinois. Most libraries don't have any kind of trustee handbook. They have their bylaws and their policies, and that's about it. So I was really, you know, digging through all of these stuff. So I've got, you know, as we.
This is for you.
Okay.
That's your copy. I'll go ahead.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna skip to D because my
Yes,
brain
please.
says, let's
Yes,
move
by all
the
means.
things off the list that we might already have solutions for.
Yes,
Have we already pinpointed an equity anti-racism training that is available and appropriate for us that we could put alongside the OMA training we just talked about?
no, have not identified it yet,
Okay,
but I was also,
thank you.
I was thinking of, there was two things that occurred to me about that, was I know that as part of our interview process, we will get a level of bias training, bias awareness training from COYA. I don't know if that is a larger equity and anti-racism training is something that they could provide to us, separately contracted at a later date, maybe not. They may know of a resource we can look to, but I also think that we could, I'm sure that we could find other resources, but I do think that pairing that with, and that was gonna be my question, is that something that we can pair with that OMA for, as the new board?
Can we
of
ask if there's information, I mean, we have Department of Anti-Racism.
Yes.
I'm assuming there's some sort of training floating around there. Can we ask the staff if there's something that would be appropriate for us to do as well? Because then that would be the same.
Internal resources?
Yeah, that would be the same training that the staff is getting.
Yeah.
I think that's not a bad place to start.
I think that is,
Distributing handouts.
I know, I'm feeling like I need to start calling you Professor.
I just want to let you guys know we're actually doing pretty good on the times. We're
Yeah.
not that crazy.
and speaking of that, you'll notice that we, at one point, we did have time blocks kind of identified to that, and I can't remember, was it Virginia, was it your,
What? No, not me. I don't
Oh,
think
wasn't
so.
it that you had said to put like time?
Was
Just
was
a
it
time?
Virginia?
That was me.
Oh, nice, I like
that I think can help us, and I think, and that idea of, so and of course, these aren't like hard and fast,
No.
you know, we're done, but I think it is a good check-in for us, and somebody said this, and I don't want to take credit for this idea of like, okay, we said we were gonna do 20 minutes, we've been at it for 20 minutes, are we any closer to a decision tonight?
I think that my next step on this is going to be adding objectives on top of it. So like the conversation we just had, you know, Monterey was saying, like, what are we aiming to get done tonight? I think if we can just have that in the agenda already, then that's not a conversation we have, and we know like, okay, tonight's goal, we are going to, you know, equity and anti-racism training. We're obviously not doing it tonight, but we've identified what our next step is.
Yeah. And
Let's
so,
move on to the next piece. So, yeah.
and so why I had the highlighters was to begin to kind of just go through and like pick out those things that, like, you know, phrases or ideas that jump out at us that we like, that we can incorporate, you know, and begin to do that. And perhaps something will jump out at us and make us think of something else or something related that we can add a note to it, but that, you know, we're not, and that's why I also wanted paper. For myself, I like working that way because I think we all know that we look and process things.
This is your stash, by the way.
Oh, thank you. We process screens and physical differently.
If this is a committee, I will join.
Okay. You an extra one?
Maybe, yeah.
By the way, I really like the self-evaluation bit.
Yeah, I love it.
Cohesiveness, effectiveness, and productivity. I really like that piece. The improvement of the board, cooperation, communication, understanding among the trustees. And I actually have, our vision, and mission impact, and I actually think we should incorporate, like, that piece of communication, cooperation, understanding, and the cohesiveness, efficiency, productivity, somehow with the mission statement that is what we put forward. I love this clarification of roles.
And like the park district is doing so much to this document, so good. I already saw this, but I can't believe it.
As soon as I saw it, I thought, we only have to do it once,
Right,
and then you just
exactly.
update it.
Yep.
Like,
Updating it is.
no, I'm not saying updating it is nothing.
No, I
but
know, that's what I was just thinking.
That's
like,
why it can be so robust.
Yes.
I'm guessing nobody
One-
sat down and did that in one swoop. This is years of.
For sure. Yes. Yes, that's my hope too, I think. But it's like, if this was the dedicated responsibility of like the secretary or something to just like, oh, did something change in today's meeting? Let's make sure we update the manual. Like, we just have to think about that, of like not creating something that just lives in isolation until the next time we look at it in its entirety, you know? I think it's important to think about how it's living and how often we can interact with it.
Now, if I remember correctly, a lot of, some of these were from
Villa Park?
Villa Park, yes.
Oh, that's funny.
So,
Oh.
so,
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, so the ones that say 201, 215, or whatever, 250, 216, those are all from Villa Park, right?
yeah, I believe so, yeah.
And when do we usually do the evaluation for the ED? Do we have a regular month, or does it just kind of, did we not?
We were always kind of doing it in January, February, March, but I think,
We did it last time because we were waiting for a full year, and then we did it the following January.
yeah, it was like, cause she was, came out in October, so it was a little bit longer. And also, like, that was right in the middle of budget and everything, so I think there makes a certain sense of, doing it on the anniversary, but I think whatever calendar is used needs to be communicated up front.
Yeah.
I think that was not clear in the past, it was, but yeah, so I think, yeah, these are just, I'll give everybody a chance to kind of just start to a little dedicated time to pick through and.
I'm looking at some of these and thinking, these would be good for the public to have as well, because it's plain speak about
I agree.
what things we own and we don't own.
Yeah.
Is the park district pretty public?
Yes,
That's like on their site, right?
yeah, and they also have like a little handout, that they printed, they put together for running for, park board. That's on their website as well. Which I don't remember really ever seeing anywhere else, on the public site.
So Bruno, I mean, I understand that we're probably highlighting anything that jumps out at us, but is the idea right now that we would like to say that we think a section like the board member commitment needs to be in the handbook? And we hope that the committee that's looking at the actual composition of the handbook
Includes that?
includes the details? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, just the sheet of paper that's on top for me is 201 Board of Trustees, the thing from Villa Park, board member commitment, right?
Yeah.
So all of these points sound great, but I think right now it might be, my argument would be that right now it might be more useful for the five of us to say we would like a set of commitments and then let
Yeah.
I would like
the more granular work.
clear board roles
I'm gonna write this down in the
Along-
document I already started, okay?
Thank you.
with the information we discussed around, using committees more. I would like that detailed with the roles, so that we have the 4 officers, but then we also have the expectations of anybody who belongs to an ad hoc committee.
We had also mentioned, so this would not be for the handbook, I think this would be for the bylaws. But we had also, oh, you know what? It just says, speak at for the full board, only when the full board sanctions doing so. So I had mentioned, not be as co-board, but I had mentioned that I thought that we should have a discussion about if there should be any standing committees, you know, in addition to the officer roles. So again, I think I'm correct, right? That's a
Yeah.
bylaws issue
Yeah, I
rather
think
than
you're correct, yeah.
than a handbook issue.
Yeah,
So ad hoc committees are a
As
handbook thing,
yeah,
but the standing committees would go into our bylaws because then they would become part of our permanent
I think
structure.
ad hoc committees are also,
as
Or are the
needed.
ad hoc committees already mentioned in the bylaws?
They are already mentioned as like a thing that can be created, but I think in the handbook, we could say, here's a list of ad hoc committees from the past. Of like things that have been created in the past as an example, like
And
the
how they might work, kind of
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
yeah, because
Oh,
the
general.
bylaws don't need to have that context, but the handbook can say, here's a guide for future of what we did. Here were reasons we did ad hoc committees in the past. That's, I think, a good delineation on that.
I'm sorry, there was some, I feel like we jumped around a little bit. Did I miss the conversation about equity and anti-racism as I was handing stuff out?
We did. The conversation is that there's going to be bias training with Koya, and we are also going to ask the staff what internal anti-racism training already exists before we go out and seek more.
And make it available to the board, whatever staff is taking, that it gets shared with us to do as we pursue identifying a more comprehensive board training.
Okay, I mean, again, I know I've mentioned that, I'm so sorry I keep mentioning it, but I feel like I get more and more desperate and I'm not getting an answer, which is that I still don't know what to do with this problematic of we have strategic goals and we're not supposed to participate in or like decide on the day-to-day activities of the library. But what happens if those two things are clashing? You know, I don't know, like, I feel like that's not a conversation that we just can have as a board. Like, it has to be a conversation that we have in concert with the leadership team, right? Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's a conversation that we have to have with an ED, because they're the ones that are the link between the strategy that we set and how it's in motion with the staff. I think that's the link that we're missing right now,
Yeah.
and why there's nothing that we can do, because the leadership is not empowered.
Well, I mean, I understand that they're not here at the table right now, so I definitely don't want to like make any decisions without that, but I feel like, for instance, last month's meeting, one of the things that I heard our co-interim executive director Lee say was that they're not waiting on a new ED to have the conversations about the retention of staff members of color at this institution, right? Like, so I feel like, and again, that's just one of any possible examples, but like, I think that there's still several months before there's potentially several months before we get a new ED, and I don't think, I'm not comfortable with just being like, oh, so our strategic goals or the things that we decided on can be on the back burner until we have a new executive director. I mean, do you not agree? You think that there are like strategic goals set aside?
No, I
No,
don't wanna
I don't think so.
compromise them at all, I just don't know. I guess what do you
The question is,
think
how do
we
we
can
do it? Like,
Yeah,
the question is, how do we do it? Like, the question is, I mean, like, what is an appropriate way? This cannot be the first time in the history of library boards that the conversation has happened between what is the relationship between the day-to-day practices and the strategic goals. So I'm trying to get a sense of, like, in terms of what kind of training we need, that is like an actual piece of information that does not have, for instance, a statute, like OMA, at least there's like a law, and there are exceptions to the OMA that we can look up. And the training that I think we need very imminently is about how we do that part. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we make sure that we have not just, how do we make sure that we have and are accountable to our strategic goals without impinging on the decisions that leadership teams get to make about their day-to-day operations? Like, do you all have a sense of how to do that? Because, I mean, if it's just a mother-in-law problem, then,
it's not just a you problem, I just don't have an answer, and I don't know.
can we try to figure out how we get an answer?
I mean, I think we can get answers on, like, we can get an answer on last month's question. We saw it wasn't in the packet, going back to leadership and saying, hey, can you give us enough? I don't think we can do macro things until we have an ED. I think we can address micro things, and I say micro, meaning we can address something that is very specific, which is this specific retention issue. Like, it's not the whole of the anti-racism process here.
Sure.
It's, I think we can ask the staff about specific things, because we did ask, like, what are we doing? What are the things on the ground that are happening? Because you're right, they did mention they're not just leaving it to lay until there's an ED. But I don't know that there's any strategic anything that we can do, that we can push, or that we can.
That's not what I'm saying. I guess I'm saying that we already have strategic goals that we as a board have come up with, right? I'm saying over the next few months, until there is a new ED, what is the protocol for that relationship? This is like to me, this is an almost crisis situation, not just because of the last month, but because I feel like all the decisions that happened that caused us so much exposure in the last year have to do with like a differing sense of what our responsibilities are, and I would like some training on that.
I think that Virginia's suggestion of getting the training that's available to the staff for anti-racism is actually really, I think that's salient on a lot of levels, because what we may find is this training is the training that I would expect in 1992, and we are not in 1992. Or it could be, hey, this is really great training, this is a great reminder to us, this should be a great reminder to the library leadership team that this is something that the board takes seriously enough that we are actually spending time to do it. I think that is without meaning to, whether, and I don't know if it was you being brilliant and directing us, but like that I think is a like measurable, distinctive piece that we can do to remind our interims and to remind our, directors, right, and heads of departments at the library that we are paying attention. This isn't something that we're, sweeping under the rug, and we're really concerned about it. It also is a totally fair piece of oversight if what we're saying is we are not just about like, this is like the argument, like, maybe I'm a total jerk for saying this, but sometimes I say like, for me, the problem with racism is not a minority issue, that's a white person problem, because you kind of are in charge and you've created the system, right? sorry guys, for everyone who's listening who's upset. But I do think like if we have put forward, we have a vision, we have a library prioritization of equity and anti-racism, and if the training that our staff is getting is training that we're saying, that doesn't align with the priority that we've put forward, I think that's incredibly important.
No, I think,
And I think that's a great first
It
step.
also
It's
means
not
we're
the end
using,
goal.
we're using the resources from the department we took lots of pains to create.
sure, and that sounds, I did not mean to, and I'm sorry if it sounded like what I was asking for was instead of the thing that you were saying. I'm trying to get I'm trying to get like, a more eagle's eye view of a problem, like what is the relationship between, like how are we accountable to our strategic goals, if not through examining the day-to-day practices of the institution. That's, and I feel like I cannot be the first person who's asking this question. I do not feel like we are the first board that is coming up against this problem, and I'm trying to figure out, so I just feel like that is a dire, again, if you all feel like you have an understanding of what the relationship, of what that relationship is, I would love for that conversation to be what we have right now. But I don't think that that's true. I don't think that any of us are confident in like, this is our purview, this is not, we don't get to ask questions about this, we do get to ask questions about that. I
think maybe that's more the conversation, and not to steer away from it being about equity, but I think maybe the question is more broadly where the lines are, and then we narrow in on where do these lines sit within, because I don't know that there's going to be a lot of information out there about where those lines are in specifically an anti-racism department, because
fair. Where are they?
doesn't really exist a whole lot of places. So maybe the training is, we figure out where the lines are, and then we sit down as a board and we decide, okay, where do those lines sit within anti-racism and equity?
I agree. So here, let me give maybe a different kind of example. What I'm saying is that I did not feel, a couple of years ago, I think, or maybe it was just last week, I don't know. It feels like a couple of years ago that there was a conversation, for instance, about moving away from newspapers, like print newspapers, into only online newspapers.
Yeah.
You remember this conversation, right?
Yeah.
We got to ask about that. We got to say, how is this affecting people? Like, we got to say, like, what is the thinking behind this decision? We got to say, how does this impact, like, the members of our community who are trying to age in place and then don't feel like they, like, we got to ask those questions that are about day-to-day practices. Right? Like, those were decisions that leadership made, but they were accountable to us for those, like, we got to at least ask those questions, right? And then when it turned out that it was not working out, or there was, and this is something that Jocelyn did, when there was a lot of resistance, we got to hear about how that was changing. I feel like the reason that equity keeps coming up in this particular issue is that I feel like we don't have that right when it comes to issues about equity. Do you know what I mean? That's what I'm worried about.
That's why we had a director of anti-racism.
Yes,
equity.
and we don't anymore.
We don't have one right now, and we don't have an ED. I feel like we're missing too many pieces to do the thing that, I feel like that's why we can't find the bridge. Like, we knew where it was before, but we're missing two of the pieces that
But we do have two interim EDs. They're doing the work. They're literally having the conversations with staff members. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're doing
the work from the perspective of the ED, but like, they're still only human. I don't know that they've been able to.
There's a difference between filling in on some of the operational pieces and setting the vision as an executive director would, I think, in terms of setting that vision and that motivation, and frankly, in a way, lighting the fire under the butts of the whole staff around an issue that I think an interim it doesn't, is not necessarily expected to do.
I agree, and
But
I don't want to, I'm sorry, this is deeply frustrating for me because I feel like what I'm trying to get at is a policy versus norms issue. And I feel like what we're talking about is the specific, I don't disagree that there's a difference, a qualitative difference between an ED and an interim ED and what's in their capacity to do and what there is in their capacity to decide. I'm not saying, for instance, that I think that the current co-interim ED should be hiring a director of anti-racism and equity if they don't think that that's appropriate. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is as a board, so if you'll just bear with me with the abstraction, as a board, how do we ask questions, for instance, about equity and anti-racism that give us responses like they did when we were talking about the newspaper situation, than the responses that we got when we were talking about like the firing of, the director of anti-racism and equity. Does that make sense as a question? Like, what is the difference between those two situations? Where is the end of our responsibility? When are we actually like extending beyond what the responsibility of the board is?
I would almost say that the issue of the newspapers as a specific acquisition of our collection was an overshare of the staff to the board. That I did not think that warranted raising to a board level discussion.
And I think it did because public comments, but
that's
we have a lot of public comments.
But in terms of like a strategic policy perspective of what we do, we don't, nowhere in our authority, generally accepted authority of a library board is to say we're gonna get the Sun-Times and we're not gonna get the Tribune.
But I think for reflection purposes,
it
is a curiosity, why do we treat some subjects differently? And I think there's a lot of internalized stuff that probably comes up for each of us there. I also just think we know what happens with DEI work, it is a pattern, and business as usual tends to actually undermine anti-racist work. And so I think maybe that's the rub too, is if we're not doing it, we're actually undoing the work we've done. And I think we're seeing that play out. So I think it is really nuanced and tough. I don't know the answer though. I'm really struggling with it myself.
And I'm wondering if this is, and I guess what's underlying all of this is that I think we need to step outside of this board and this leadership to be able to get a more global sense of how this is handled in other places, not so that we can throw away everything that we have and copy someone else, but get a sense of perspective. Do you know what I mean? I don't agree with Matt that on the question of the newspaper, but are we going to have a debate around every time do you know what I mean? Do we have or is there a place, is there something, a common conversation that we can have that says the ethics statement or any of these policy documents that we're trying to put together, which would provide a common understanding to every member of the board? The question that I have that I would love to see addressed here is literally, what is the relationship between setting strategic priorities, being accountable to the community, for instance, to in regards to the strategic priorities, and the day-to-day functioning of the library? This is like a fundamental how does the board operate question to me.
I recognize your concerns. I think it's a matter of, and I think one of the pieces is the nature of a lot of what we do in Oak Park, of being involved in a lot of these things, does not model translate into what is the standard format of a governance board. There is a reason, like, I was joking about only having, but there are library boards that only meet 3 or 4 times a year. They pass their budget, they do their director's evaluation, and they meet once or twice for other things. And that's all they do. And they like pass a policy and they get a report on where the quarterly reports are for their budget. And that is their definition of a governance board. And it fills the legal requirements for that. That does not necessarily fit with how the expectation of how a board works in Oak Park. But that level of governance is a wide and varied piece of everything from how we do things to the way that does things. And there's probably even further examples of beyond of how involved we are. But I think it is a balance, of where we and honestly, the board, I think prior to this year was never in a position that it felt that it needed to examine how the strategic priorities and strategic plan was or was not being executed as the board had voted to lay it out. And
Okay,
so
but we did go through that, so is the argument, is not the argument, sorry, but is the idea now that we say that we no longer ask those questions
No.
about, so then,
I think,
right, so then what is so then how do we decide, and that's what I'm saying, is that I would just like for us to have a shared common understanding. I will say with the caveat that no 7 people are going to have a shared common understanding of anything, right? Like, but some sense that we can say, this seems inappropriate, or an overextension, who's the arbiter of where that balance is? I understand what you're saying about balance. I also like the word balance. I also think that it's really important for me to try and get to a sense of balance, but like where you might articulate what that balance is and where I might do it would be different, right?
Absolutely.
So that means, and what I'm trying to say is for us to function as a board, I think that we need, and my question is, where do we get that answer? Where do we get the answer of whatever, or what are the 5 different sources that we look at to try and get a sense of what the relationship is?
I think for me it comes down to, and this might be oversimplistic, but I think for me it comes down to where's our authority in terms of holding a particular member of staff accountable, and it's the executive director or any other. If we hired an in-house counsel, and the board hired, and any other contract that the board hires, if we've come to a point where we feel that our goals and stuff are not being met by the person we have hired, that we have directly hired to institute that, then we take the action on that. And so for me, it becomes how do we enact an accountability piece on the people we hold to do that? The director of collections, if we feel that the director of collections, and I'm not saying that collections has a problem, I'm just, the exact example, is that somehow collections is not living up to, fulfilling a strategic priority. The person we can hold accountable for that is the executive director or the interim director.
But how do we know? If we don't get to
member that we have.
No, not how do we know that this is the person that we hold accountable? How do we hold the executive director accountable for what's happening in collections if we're not allowed to ask questions about collections?
And if the director chooses not to answer them, then we hold them accountable for that.
Okay, and you all knew this, because I feel like I knew it until this last year, and then there were several situations in which I was told that, like, even the asking of the question was an overreach on the board's
Like
part.
last month?
No,
Oh.
in the last year or so. That a lot of the things that we get to
Yeah.
ask questions about,
I
like
had
what
my
happened
hand
to
slapped
this
a few
office,
times,
right?
yeah.
Sorry?
I have my hand slapped a few times for, and I don't know, I think that just is evidence of poor relationships between the board and staff.
I think that's where my head is going,
Yeah.
is that, that was not always,
That wasn't the case,
And I
that kind of,
think,
Right.
I
But
don't remember previously not being, I think that's where
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
getting caught up in this, not knowing how to respond to you, because
yeah.
there
No,
was.
I do ask the question.
And I want to say that I'm also speaking from a place of confusion, because I thought I understood what kind of questions were appropriate, like, do you know what I mean? And I thought I understood that it was okay to say.
I think you do understand, I think that's why we are doing all of the things that we are doing right now, because we were not asking those questions, or we were not able to ask those questions, and we held some meetings.
Or we asked and weren't answered.
And I think, and this actually all comes back to, which is why I printed out this particular one from D97, the board superintendent communications.
Yeah.
And it has a
I like
table
that one.
about type of request issues, examples, process, first point of contact, in terms of like laying out what is an informational request, who does it go to, and I think that, you don't have to follow this, we don't have to copy it, I think that's absolutely, we don't want to copy pieces that don't apply to us, but I think that this kind of template, it would be incredibly helpful, like something like this that we construct, and I think this kind of thing should be constructed in partnership with the executive director.
Yes. Or,
Because I think the staff,
yeah,
so that there is clear
Right.
expectations up front about the answers we expect to be able to get from staff, from the executive director and stuff like that, and what the staff can expect to get asked about from us.
yeah, 100%.
And I think, and so I don't know that this comes around to your original point, Monterima, but I think that something like this, I think a lot of this comes back to setting those clear expectations. And the level of communication that the board had with Dee Brennan was different than what we had with David, and which was different than we had with Jocelyn, and what we did with Ed Myers, who was here before Dee. So, whether it's a weekly check-in email versus these things and those conversations, I think it's a lot of relationship setting and then evolution from that, from start. And I think one of my personal failures in this last, with our last engagement of a director, was not seeing the need for that, of making sure that we had clear expectations from both sides up front, so that we were clear about that. And so I think that and I think that's also part of this, I think would help expectations amongst ourselves, and with a document like this, expectations between the board and the staff, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I think, thank you, this is like, I think 20 minutes ago, this is what I was trying to come up with.
Okay.
Like, is that, like literally, what do we do? Like, what are the things that we're allowed to? So, is it the two of you who are on this handbook committee?
Yeah, and I'll open it to others, but you and I can jump on this after the holidays.
Sure.
Board, super, staff committee.
Something I would like to share with any potential candidates, to be like, look, this is something that we have not created, but we would like to create with you, because we want those expectations.
And
Wait, what?
Like a framework, like a
before
beginning, like at the
Yes.
beginning of a framework of this document, and say,
Yes,
this is
be
what
like,
the board is
This
developing.
is something that our colleagues across the street, or down the street, have done. We actually think it's a good example. We would like you to tell us what you expect of us, and we will also, in turn, let you know what those clear expectations that we are going to be requesting of you. Because I think something like this is a really important, way to create the guardrails of expectations. Like, I know, like, when I manage people, I very clearly am like, how do you learn? How do you like criticism? And no one likes criticism, it's PS, but in what context can I give you criticism where it's not going to feel like an attack? In what, like, how can we have that communication? And, you know, I redline their documents. I also send my documents to them for redline. And I tell them it needs to be fair because I want them to give me the same criticism back. And so like, that's something like, that's an expectation that like, with the staff I manage, I put forward,
I
right?
think one of the things that we need to make sure we express, and I don't know if this goes into a handbook or whatever, but I know this was a stumbling block the last year, is sometimes people at this table don't ask questions because we want the answer. Sometimes we ask questions because those people in the community asked, and we need to have it said in the room. And so sometimes these questions will feel like an attack, or they will feel judgmental. And really it is, we know that there is a good answer that can come from staff, and we want it to go out directly to the public, and we're the public's voice to ask that question. So I think there has to be a lot of explaining to the new ED part of that communication as well, that when we ask questions, or, you know, it's not always because we're second guessing. A lot of times it is because these questions have been asked of us, and we know somebody out in the community is waiting for an answer, and we're allowing for that answer to go out to the community directly.
I actually think that that's a perfect thing, that the board expects that the community will come to them with concerns and questions. As elected representatives, they will ask these questions in open session so that those members can hear the answer. And that the executive director, understands that dichotomy of, you know, we're all to a certain extent, I know Matt, like you've said, we're politicians. I think, I'm pretty crappy as a politician because I'm way too awkward with saying what exactly is in my head, but like, I do think that is something. I mean, that is kind of the first thing that you're taught, you know, when you
Go to your elected officials, go tell them, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I do want to say though, not every question we ask is from the community, right? Like some is just
Right.
from us,
No,
the
no, but-
trustees.
and
So I do worry, like there is defensiveness sometimes with like, I hope when we hire an ED, that is something we're thinking about. Like I think critically asking questions is a part of any board and any DEI work, quite frankly. And so like the ED should be able to receive hard questions without immediately getting.
I don't disagree with that.
I would like to, if I can, because we're talking about the new ED and hiring, I would like to say, and I hope, hopefully we will go through this again when we all go, I think we'll all do the anti-bias training from COYA when we do look at applications, is that one specific thing that was mentioned in that training that I thought was incredibly helpful was to think of candidates not as if they're a fit for our culture, but what they bring, like not how will they fit with the institution, but what they will add to the institution. And I think that the idea that we would need to tell the executive director that this is how the communication should be taken is probably not going to work, right? Like, but in that thing, like actually developing something like this, which has, for lack of a better word, the blessing of the people who have to kind of enact it, you know, with us or with the board, I think that's reasonable. I really like this aspect of the communication process. One of the things that I was noticing is that it actually does not say anything about like interpersonal dynamics, right? It's about process. So like people are obviously going to be defensive or upset or if that, I'm actually talking about me, but that's not the point. The point is, you know, how does the work happen? So, are we doing our time?
We're doing pretty good. us, we're
We've had a
doing
lot of
pretty good.
talk.
I don't know, I think it was really productive, I think.
Self-evaluation was our cancel
I can't wait for a board self-evaluation.
We're on a curve, we're on a curve.
I think sometimes I feel like the word efficiency is not great.
But I don't like that word either, because I mean, there's a cost to efficiency. And
Absolutely there
I
is.
think, like, we are a very thoughtful board, and I don't wanna ever
And
act like that's a bad thing.
honestly, that was part of why I wanted to put the times on here, because we need to give ourselves adequate time to talk about things and not fill our agenda so much that we feel like we're pressured to skip over things or not do a thorough conversation. Like, if we look at something and go, that's gonna be 60 minutes, like, let's just call it 60 minutes and decide that other things need to be tabled to another month.
Yeah.
All right, so I have under board role responsibilities and policies that Matt and Christina are starting a handbook party.
In January.
In January.
January 2nd, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was January 1st, like 12:01.
Yeah.
Listen, I gotta do something, I mean,
I'll be asleep, but I won't be doing anything fun, so.
You may not be asleep.
I will be watching the Rose Bowl parade. I
That's been
love
pretty
it.
great.
That is my favorite thing. It's one of my favorite things all year.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
That in light of the conversation we had and the decision that I think we're going with in focusing on coming up with some prescriptive language around communication, do we make that our first step in board-staff relationship? That we figure out, we're getting out the survey, I feel like that's part of board-staff relationship, but then also that we set some preliminary guidelines on communication that we would then work to finalize with the ED. Do we feel like that, this is why I so want objectives on here, like, do we feel like that fulfills what we were trying to do today, or no?
I think that also could help us establish some things with, you know, just our current situation as well. I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be anything that just is awaiting, like some of this, you know, some of this framework that we begin to develop could also help clarify just our, you know, the general, you know, approach to how we present questions to our interim EDs, you know, going forward, and how they can, and how our expectations of how they communicate with us. You know, I think, you know, we've had, you know, when it's a crisis situation, you know, do Susie and Lee let me know and then I let the rest of you know? Or is it they just tell all of us at once and stuff like that? You know, and I think that something like that, along with something like this, I think helps, you know, you know, one of them is gonna be out of town, let us know.
Nobody has to think about it, just.
Yeah, and it's just our practice, you know, for time being, and it's clear, so that we're not like, is this something I have to do every time like this? It's like, this is that piece, so, yeah. So yeah, it is a lot of pages for us to go through, and I'll make sure I will drop copies, physical copies at Suzanne and Ted's house for them to go as well. But I think I would just, while we are, you know, I know we all are busy and everything like this, so please, like, I will send out reminders after New Year's for everyone to kind of circle back to look at the documents. I'm happy to drive around and pick up physical copies from folks if you've highlighted and made notes, so that when the committee, Christina and I and whoever ends up being the third, sit down to meet, we can have those documents together and start to pull them, you know, collate them together as a, I don't even think collate's the right word for that, but bring them, you know, bring those ideas together in a way that presents it as a document for us to have a cogent discussion around, this is the thing I want, this is the thing we probably don't need or could be, exists in a different document or something like that. Does that sound good to everyone? I don't want to pressure anyone over the next couple of weeks because I know there are a variety of holidays coming up, and
Also search
School.
committee meetings.
search committee meetings, school school will be on break, and those with children will be driven even more insane than we normally are by our lovely offspring that
We done did it to ourselves.
children are a joy. That's what they tell us. But so I think that I feel really heartened by the conversations we've had tonight, and the progress, and bringing some ideas together, and that. So I feel good. Does anybody else have anything we want to talk about before we adjourn?
I feel like we made a lot of really good headway, and I really appreciate these resources. I think that we have, even if we don't have like a detailed recipe, we have the beginnings of a map in terms of our relationship with our next ED, right? I think the expectations is a really important document. I think committing to giving them something at the forefront of how they're gonna be evaluated, being able to revisit that in a mid-year discussion, right? Because even that mid-year discussion, they might say, I feel like the discussions I'm having with the staff is pretty straightforward, but the bigger issue is like reaching out to different members of the community, and this really doesn't touch that really important keystone. Or, hey, I think it's a bigger deal that I need to be dealing with this. Like, I think that that's a really important open communication piece that I will say from my personal view is something I would like to see the next ED feel that he, she, thee, them have a comfort and a voice in talking to us and keeping those communication lines open. So I feel like the fact that we've put that forward as a map, I would hope is something that would hearten any potential candidate, as well as those who are eagerly hoping for a new ED, of which I am one of them, right?
Me too.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
With that, we have concluded our agenda, and we have no closed session business. I will declare us adjourned for 2024.
Thank you. Do we want